this is gonna be take two of this one, and I just realized after talking for half an hour, probably close to 40 minutes, that when I got back to the check on it, I was at 2 minutes, and it was choppy. So I may be jumping back and forth from this screen just to make sure the recording screen is actually recording. So yeah, if you thought that your last 40 minutes was bad at all, I'm a little more frustrated, I think, than maybe what you are. Now, this is part two of the American Age. I'm going to start here with the Cold War, kind of wrap that up of the introduction, and then I'm going to get into each president. I may stop it after I talk the Cold War, maybe after I get through Eisenhower. Maybe I'll stop it there so I can break this down in three parts like I did the last one. Now, we're looking at here, I'm going to check right now, make sure this thing's recording. We're good to go. We're looking at communism. We have to look at Truman. He's going to be at the start of this bad boy, and we're looking at Truman. He's going to really have a viewpoint of the Soviets as aggressive and as oppressive, as bad as the Nazis. So we look at that Munich Pact. Truman does not want to be Neville Chamberlain. So he views them as this evil kind of empire. We'll see what Reagan calls it. But he's going to view that freedom, it's freedom loving versus freedom loving people are everywhere are threatened by this communism. So we see that he's really going to push this, which is really going to lead to a fear in America of communism. This campaign he's going to be pushing against. He needs money. He needs the soldiers to be able to meet communism. So what do politicians do? They use a lot of rhetoric to attempt to kind of motivate the people in a democracy to kind of support the government. So this is why he kind of does that. One of the reasons, but again, he views them as a evil empire that need to be met with force. Now, if we're looking at the Cold War, we're looking at containment. Now, we can throw out acronyms like MAD, mutually assured destruction. We'll see that come about. But really, the policy of the Cold War is going to be something we call containment. Uncle Sam here is going to attempt to contain the spread of communism from Western Europe to the United States, from the Middle East, from Asia. So we see that this is going to be the idea of containment. Now, where do we get this idea from? We have three people here. This guy is the most, least known out of these guys, but his telegram is very well known. We have Truman on the left. We also have George Marshall. If we're looking at the early Cold War from the American perspective, we're looking at these three guys, in my opinion. Now, George Kennan on the far right. This guy, he's somebody who lived in Russia. He worked as a American diplomat in Russia from 1941 up until, I think, 1946. And he's going to send something that's known as, it's a telegram, but it becomes known as a long telegram because it's over 5,000 words in it. And on his telegram, it's going to be essentially going to become the playbook, the blueprint of how to deal with the Soviets in the future. This guy is an expert on dealing with people from Russia and from the Soviet Union. So what he's going to argue here is, and some people argue he actually liked the Russian people more than American people, and he could have lived there. But he thinks the Russian government is an abomination. It's an evil. It doesn't understand any kind of logic. Can't reason with them. They only understand one thing, and that's military force. So he has a kind of very negative viewpoint on the Soviet leaders. So he sends this long telegram back to Truman in the White House, and he tells him all this stuff. Here's how you deal with them. He says the problem with the Soviet Union is the fact that they're very insecure, so they need to expand. Why are they insecure? It goes back to geography. They've been invaded multiple times, going back to Charles XII. Actually, dating back before that, you had Mongols invade. Then you had Napoleon invade. Then you had Hitler. You had the first German army of World War I invade. Then you had Hitler invade. So they've been invaded multiple times. So they're very insecure people in that regard. So they need to expand their borders. So they're by nature want to expand to protect their home base. That's Kennan's argument, based off of history, based off geography. Let me check this, make sure it's working. And so he sends this back, and he also says that they only understand one message, and that is a strong message. And you can't deal with the Soviet Union's leaders like you deal with a normal government. So this is Kennan's telegram. The Soviets actually have their own one too. Um, what's it? I'll come back to you on that. What it's called here in a moment. Now, Truman is going to essentially install that, and what he's going to do is he's going to give this big speech in front of Congress, and it's going to be a 90-minute speech. He gets a standing ovation, and he uses, again, that rhetoric, I believe. He says a lot, and essentially the message was that we need to spend the money now to prevent spending more money down the road with war. And, he states that we need to essentially back things with military force. And this Truman Doctrine, as it becomes known as, is really the first step to contain the spread of communism. That how are we going to do this? We'll meet them with military force in these places. And this is what Kennan really argues. He says, listen, you have to go meet these Soviets. If they're going to disrupt peaceful governments, you need to go meet them with military force. You need to stop them from doing that. So this is the Truman Doctrine. This is what gets us in Korea. This will eventually get us in Vietnam. This is the Truman Doctrine. The other one is, and this is what he talks about too in his speech, is he calls it the Marshall Plan. He knows that Congress would not give him the money because they don't really care for Truman that much. So he calls it after this guy. This guy was a 5-star general. If you ever look into him, he's a brilliant tactician. He's FDR's right-hand man. He doesn't go over to Europe during World War II in a sense of leading armies. He's the advisor to FDR. He's like FDR's right-hand man. This is George Marshall. He's beloved, and they call it the Marshall Plan. And what this is this is going to be the idea of rebuilding Western Europe. We got to look at the context, 1946, 47. Europe is in shambles, been bombed heavily, had armies invade multiple times, back and forth, fighting over contested areas. And, there's millions of refugees in Europe. There's people starving to death. It's in record. One of the worst winters in European history is right about this time, 46, 47. So you got people starving to death, not having homes, and freezing to death. So in these winters. So what the Marshall Plan's idea was, let's rebuild these Western economies. And if we look at communism, who does it appeal to? It appeals to the poor. Who want to be lifted up in a society, who want to be taken care of by government and society. And this is what Soviet Union really appeals for. So the Marshall Plan was, hey, let's rebuild these countries. Let's get their businesses going again. Let's get people working again. Let's get them shelter. Let's get them food. Let's get them American goods. If they're making money, they can buy American products. So we'll make money in the back end. Supporting money up front to make money in the back end. This is what it is. Now, if you're to argue the Soviets' perspective, they're looking at this and saying, this is absolutely American imperialism. We're using our economy to really lift these countries up for our own good in the long run. We're trying to make them concede to us. And again, if European countries don't do what America tells them to do, then they'll lose all that financial support. They'll lose all the goods. So this is a way of America expanding their empire. So this is the Soviets' perspective, and it goes back to their telegram as well. This one was called the Novikov telegram. I looked that up, Novikov. I actually just read up on it, kind of polished back up on it. Very interesting read, just talking about Americans were imperialists, and they were a threat to the Soviet Union. So it's their telegram, essentially. It's their comparison to the Kennan telegram. So we go on. We have 1948, 49, I don't remember exact year. We see the establishment of NATO. And what this was a military alliance that is going to essentially allow us to have an alliance with these Western European countries. And again, it's to stop the spread of communism. It's that containment. We have Canada, we have the United States, and we have Western Europe. Today, this thing stretches all the way over here to the east, right on the border of Russia, which many people today state that it's a threat to world peace because if Russia ever contests to get those lands back as part of a Soviet Union, a Soviet sphere of influence, a Russian sphere of influence, you can have World War III break out. But NATO at the time, the Soviets have a much larger army than us, than these Europeans. They could come over here and invade and take all the way to Portugal if they wanted to with the, click of their fingers, snap of their fingers. So what this does is essentially it allows for us not to have to put all kinds of soldiers over there. We just say, hey, listen, if you attack one of these, you're attacking us over here in America. So this is a military alliance. The Soviets are going to counter it with their own military alliance a few years later. I think it was 52, with something known as the Warsaw Pact, which is really just stating the same thing for Eastern Europeans. Now, to Harry Truman, this guy was short-tempered. He used a lot of cursive, foul language, and he is somebody who people had low expectations for. This guy, you got to think of, he's a vice president for the first time under FDR, on FDR's fourth term. And, he's not planning on having any presidential ambitions. Nobody knows who this guy is. and I'm not even sure he ever met FDR, to tell you the truth. So we look at this guy, Truman. Nobody has any expectations. Churchill even states that, Truman, I loathe your taking the place of FDR, but I misjudged you badly. And since that time, you more than any other man, have saved Western civilization, just to quote him real quick. So we see early on, people don't really give this guy a whole lot of credit, even when he's alive or whenever he's in White House. Nobody really thinks much of this guy. But in hindsight, as historiography is shaped, I'm a big fan of Truman. I'm somebody who thinks that he made a lot of big decisions in American history, from the atomic bomb, right or wrong, which I don't agree with dropping the atomic bomb. But again, I can't judge him for that time. But secondly, desegregating the military. We'll see some other things he did. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the highlights of these guys, things that happened while they're in office, major events of each of these presidents to give us our timeline of American history, so we don't have to kind of go through everything. So I'm trying to give you the less is more approach. He's somebody who viewed himself as an ordinary person, just in extraordinary times, and he's somebody who is going to be strong with the Soviets, right or wrong. I think he did some things wrong. I don't think he's a perfect president at all. I think he could have handled the Soviet leaders better, so we wouldn't put ourselves in a position for a Cold War. But at the same time, again, I have hindsight I can look at, and at the time, I think it's difficult decisions. Now, one of the things that really the big first thing that happens that shows the world that there's a Cold War going on, that there's hostility between these two sides, is going to be the Berlin blockade that takes place around Berlin. You guys can see where it is. Berlin is right here, West Berlin, I should say, and here's East Berlin. They're going to divide this country. They're agreed to divide it at Yalta after World War II, and we see West Germany and East Germany. This is one of the big sticking points too between America and the Soviet Union following World War II. Is the Soviet Union really wants to punish Germany for World War II. America wants to rebuild it. The Soviet Union wants to make them an agricultural society. We want them to be an industrial society. So we're going to see that this is really the big kind of problems between the two. We can understand why they would want to punish them, because they just killed 27 million of their people. So what happens in 1947, 1948? We see that the Soviets are going to set up a blockade around West Berlin, not allowing any goods, any transportation coming into this Western zone. And America has to decide what we're going to do. And this goes back to that chess match, that chess match between the two sides. America can try to just plow through the blockade and try to go right into West Berlin, but it could have started World War III. So as a result, they think, okay, and the Soviets thought we'd just give up on a city, but we're not going to do that. We're going to come up with something known as you guys probably remember, as the Berlin Airlift. To actually supply West Berlin, the Americans are going to need 4,500 tons per day. The first day, they only bring in 80 tons. So you can see they fall well short. But this thing's going to be a logistical gem for America and England and France and the Western European powers. They're going to supply them nonstop using 3 different airports, I believe, from West Germany, flying in nonstop. Every minute they're landing. They're dropping off supplies. And you see that the Soviets think that Americans are going to back down. We're going to get out. And we think they're going to back down to blockade. But what happens here is, after 277,000 flights, you will see the Soviets back down. And we got to look at, it made America look like heroes and Superman. And it really helped us, our image in the world, where the Soviets are blockading people and starving them and attempting to keep them from getting food and supplies and medicine and all that stuff. And America's going to be like, all right, we'll just hop over. Now, what the Soviets could have done, they could have shot down American planes, but that starts World War III. And in 1947, 48, World War III, America wins because we have atomic bombs. They do not. That's going to change here pretty soon now. This is looking at a contested area that's going to come back up again in 1961 with the Berlin Wall being built. Now, Truman's also known for winning an election he was supposed to lose. You can see this picture on the left. Abby, I was going to have you do one for me with the Hillary and Trump, but I see that I already have one, and I found it. So we see here that this is looking at election 1948. Truman was supposed to lose the election to Dewey, and what happens here is many people, the polls are showing that Dewey's going to win this election, 1948. Nobody wants Truman to win, and George Marshall also believed that Truman was going to lose that. And what happens in Chicago? They're on a printer strike, the Chicago Tribune, which you guys remember reading that for the strike, the Pullman strike, and the Chicago Tribune. There was a printer strike that went on, and it made the paper have to go to the press before they originally wanted to, and this actually leads to them printing off, based off the polls, that Dewey won. And we can see that Truman gets a last laugh because he'll win the 1948 election. And again, we saw this happen with Donald Trump and Hillary with the 2016 election. Same thing, where people thought Hillary was going to win. I was one of those people who thought Hillary would win. Woke up to find out that Trump won. So we see that this is looking at the election of 1948, which he was known for. Now, the following year, it goes from bad to worse in the world. We see two things happen that are really going to spook America. We see the successful test of the atomic bomb by the Soviet Union in the Kazakhstan desert, and pick up some radiation from a plane, and we're going to see that this is going to we're going to find out that the Soviets now have an atomic bomb. They were supposed to not get one until at the earliest 15 years later, and they have it 4 years later, and we're going to find out how here in a minute. The second thing happens as well is China, a longtime ally who we've dumped billions upon billions of dollars in the country. We thought them as a friend. We saw them as a friend. They fall to Mao Zedong and the communist forces in China in 1949, and now our enemies just grew by 1 billion people. And we think everybody in China, or we think communism is this monolithic state where everything comes from Moscow, that they make all the decisions. We're going to find out later on. It's going to take us some time to figure this out, that actually China is making its own decisions. They're not just listening to the Soviet Union. Shortly thereafter, thanks to those developments of 1949, now you have communists on the border of North Korea, and you also have the Soviets have the atomic bomb. And what you have here is you're looking at 1945. This was split at the 38th parallel, these two countries. It's still there today. The 38th parallel is still split today between North and South. But 1945, you saw towards the end of the war, the Soviets will actually invade Korea, and they will occupy it from the north, and America will invade South Korea and will occupy it from the south. And we see that we split this at the 38th parallel. This goes back to that geopolitics, and communism is supposed to stay up north, and everything below is democratic and capitalist. And we see that this is going to be a point of contention, 1945 to 49. The North Koreans want a unified Korea, and the South Koreans want a unified Korea as well. Both sides are itching to go fight. North Korea, every time they ask, though, they have to ask Stalin, because they needed his supplies, needed his weapons. Can we invade South Korea? He kept telling them no. 1950, he changed his tune and says, go ahead and invade. And what he hoped is that this would suck Americans' resources and soldiers down into Korea. That's exactly what it does. America is going to fight in South Korea under the UN flag in 1950 when North Korea invades South Korea. And this is Kim Jong-un, the leaders today. It was his grandfather that invades South Korea. And I think it's Kim Il-sung, I believe his name was. We see this invasion goes across, and it's going to be pushed, and they're going to drive. North Koreans are going to drive South Korea quickly. Now, America has a decision to make. Again, going back to that domino theory, this is the individual is Truman. What course do we want to take? Do we want to let South Korea fall, or do we want to pick them up and keep communism from spreading? And going back to Kennan's long telegram, we're going to see that he's going to choose to back South Korea. And he's going to use the United Nations as a means. And if we look here, he's going to take soldiers from Japan. And this is where we're rebuilding this country. And he's going to head them over to South Korea. And this domino theory is going to take effect. We're going to use the Truman Doctrine to get involved in South Korea to stop the spread of communism. Now you can see here, North Korea has a huge push on South Korea. It would have fallen within weeks. You can see the South Koreans were pinned down at a port city called Busan, and you're going to see that when the United States gets involved, they're going to call upon a man who's essentially serving as emperor. He's the most famous general probably in American history outside of George Washington and maybe Grant, and even Robert E. Lee, maybe even well known. But you're looking at He's somebody who is beloved by the American people at the time. He hasn't been back to America for years. We're going to call upon him, and he's going to come up with a bold plan. And his plan is so bold that other commanders are like, dude, this ain't going to work. And he tells them it's going to work because you guys don't think it's going to work. Nobody thinks it's going to work. And he's going to land at a city called Incheon, and it's going to be right outside of Seoul. And he's going to drive the Americans right across Seoul. And they're going to pin a lot of these North Koreans down. A lot of North Koreans are going to be forced to retreat before they get pinned down. So they completely cut off. And you're going to see he's going to push these North Koreans all the way across. Now, Truman had to make a decision. What do we do? Do we cross the 38th parallel, or we just push them back here? MacArthur is this guy's name. Here he is. He makes the aviators cool. And he's going to state that we need to push them all the way out. Let's just eradicate while we're here. While we're doing this, let's just finish them off. Truman was worried about provoking China, and China starts sending messages to people to let America know that they cannot have Americans on their border, and they will get involved if America does not kind of cease from attacking all the way north. And Douglas MacArthur is going to call their bluff and say they ain't going to attack us. And what's going to happen here is he divides his forces into two. They get all the way up close to the Yoli River, as you see here, and they're going to be overwhelmed. They're going to be hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers who are camouflaged, and they're going to cross, and they're going to attack hard on Americans, and we're going to be on our heels. And you'll see we'll be pushed back quite quickly, and we'll have a lot of soldiers die up there, and they blame MacArthur for kind of becoming too full of hubris, arrogance, and not really giving the Chinese the respect they deserve. And what happens here is they get pushed back. Now, MacArthur really starts clamoring that we need to protract this war. We need to actually let's go attack China, and let's go bomb their cities. And he even actually mentions let's use the atomic bomb. And Truman's like, dude, we ain't doing that, man. And Truman's stating that this is not we don't want to. I'm trying to keep this war in Korea. I don't want to get involved with China and have World War III. And MacArthur's on that kind of from that tree that states his dad he fought actually at Gettysburg. This guy's dad, he got I think a Medal of Honor there as well. But he's going to be somebody and believes, hey, if you're in a fight, you use every weapon you got. And Truman says, hey, I want to meet with you, and MacArthur keeps kind of stiffing him, and doesn't answer his phone calls or doesn't tell him he's going to come out there. So Truman has to fly all the way to the Pacific to tell him, hey, what are we doing here? What's the plan? He doesn't actually give him a salute. MacArthur doesn't give Truman a salute, which is something that generals probably should do for their president. And Truman feels very disrespected, but he swallows his pride, and he goes back, and then MacArthur starts bad-mouthing Truman to the press, and then Truman has to make a very difficult decision. And we got to remember, the American people, on paper, side with MacArthur. He's their hero of World War II. This guy went to the Philippines during World War II, the Bataan. You probably heard the Bataan Death March. He was a general in the Philippines. It's forced to retreat, to leave, and he says, I shall return. And he's going to return, and they're going to make all these matches and on these lighters this phrase, I shall return. MacArthur's, again, he's beloved, and they're telling him, if you fire him, it's going to be political suicide. And Truman said, listen, dude, I dropped 2 atomic bombs on cities. I can handle this. He fires MacArthur. He gets absolutely lambasted by the press, by the American people. MacArthur comes back to America for the first time in decades, and he gets ticker tape parade. They tell this guy he's a celebrity. And what really happens, though, is Truman, seeing all this glory that he's getting, he kind of gets peeved about it because they don't know the truth. He leaks all this stuff to the press how MacArthur wanted to use atomic bombs on Chinese. And again, I'm getting bogged down here. I just get excited talking about this stuff. This is a book I read last year or 2 years ago. I thought was really good. And it kind of talks about some of these things. And it's just, I apologize if I bored you. Now, this fact that the Soviets have the atomic bomb, the fact that the Chinese have fallen to communism, and the fact that our American boys are dying in Korea now. And this is again the Kennan telegram, the long telegram, and we're seeing that there's a Red Scare. This is the second one of these of two. We had the first one in the early 1920s following World War I with the Bolshevik Revolution happening in Russia, and this is the second one. And this Red Scare is going to spread, and we're going to see a lot of Americans fearful that the communists are going to expand and spread into the United States of America. And we see, as a result of the second Red Scare, you see Americans kind of investigated. and people looking for spies, and communism is spreading everywhere. It's in American living rooms, and we see this guy has a lot of power, and he's somebody who goes after anybody he views as against America, and he believes civil rights activists are on that list. This guy is probably the most powerful man in America at the time, even more powerful than Truman and Eisenhower. He's the head of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover. There's a movie out. It came out, I don't know, 5-10 years ago. I think it's called Hoover. I don't remember the name of it, but he's going to be, or Edgar, J. Edgar. I don't know. He's going to be somebody who gets power in the early 1920s that head the FBI, or intelligence agency, I should say, and he's going to really start looking for communists and people who are against the government, anti-Americans. He actually goes after MLK Jr. He blackmails him, like he blackmails a lot of people for MLK Jr.'s infidelities with his wife. So he's going to, go after anybody who's suspected communist. This is part of that Red Scare. And then we also have another name for the second Red Scare. It's actually known as McCarthyism, and it's named after this U.S. Senator, Joseph McCarthy, and he's from Wisconsin. And, he actually got election based off a made-up war record. This guy is a liar, but he has power, and nobody knows he's a liar at the time. And he starts accusing people of being communists and being guilty of the communism. And really, character assassination is what he kind of thrives on. He claims to have a list of 50 communists, and that list grows to 150, and then eventually gets to 205. Man, he's saying, I have all these names on here, and people are like, hey, show me the names, show me the names. And he's like, I'm not showing you the names. And because he doesn't really have a list, I'm sure it's a blank piece of paper. And, he starts claiming that there's communists everywhere. It's a witch hunt, much like the Salem witch trials. And, he's stating that communism is spreading everywhere. But his downfall comes in 1954. He goes after George Marshall, the guy I mentioned earlier from the Marshall Plan. He states that he's in the pocket of Moscow. And this guy, George Marshall's been a true American, only making, sound decisions for America for decades. And really, people watch him on television, and they see him just being loud, and he has no facts to support any of his claims. That list that he says he shows, again, he never shows it because he doesn't have anything. He's an alcoholic. He dies of 3 years, I think, after the Army McCarthy hearings, and of alcoholism. And we can see this is the name it gets. He kind of fans those flames. So that's McCarthyism. Another group, Hollywood 10. These guys, if you look at California, it's more liberal. Hollywood's more liberal. Just know that when you see these actors kind of, stay liberal things, they're more liberal, liberal arts. But you see that also the Hollywood 10 is known for these directors, these film directors, these Hollywood powerful men who will be blacklisted. They won't be allowed to, produce any more films. And we see that this is us, this Red Scare is against freedom. You don't have the freedom that, to express yourselves. We have teachers having to sign loyalty oaths. You also have, I have Robin Hood. I found this interesting, where, librarians are going to take books like Robin Hood out of the library because you see people, Robin Hood, taking money from the rich to give to the poor. There's communist underlinings there. So as a result, these books will be pulled, and they'll select what books to send to, soldiers overseas. So this is popular hysteria of this, dangers of communism. And, it's a mob mentality, and mobs, something back to the founding fathers, people feared them. Now, we go on. We have this guy here, who you may recognize, a younger version of him. Somebody becomes very well known for something that happens in the early 1970s. But this is somebody that Truman will actually, let me double check this real quick, just make sure I'm recording. Truman's going to call this guy a shifty-eyed goddamn liar. And he is somebody who's going to be a prosecutor going after a spy ring. And again, going back to how did the Soviets get the atomic bomb in 4 years when it's supposed to take them 15, they're going to find out through a Venona project that the Soviets have been spying with British spies and American spies. They've been spying they were spies during the Manhattan Project. And we see that the first guy that gets put under the scope is Alger Hiss. And Hiss is going to be charged for being a spy for the Soviets at Los Alamos, which is where we detonated the bomb. And Alger Hiss will not ever admit it, but he does get charged with perjury. He does serve some time. And this will actually lead on. And by the way, Nixon, Richard Nixon is his name. He actually gets a name for himself. He'll go on because of this trial. He will go on to become the vice president under Eisenhower. And this guy has some serious political ambitions. That's all you can think is in politics. The second investigation will lead to Klaus Fuchs, who is a British scientist, and this will lead to a chain reaction. Fuchs will give up the name of a guy by the name of Harry Gold, and then Gold will give up a guy by the name of David Greenglass, and Greenglass is going to squeal, and he's going to give up his sister-in-law and her husband, saying that they gave him atomic secrets at Los Alamos for the Manhattan Project. And we see that would be probably America's most famous couple, if not the most famous. Bonnie and Clyde may surpass him. This is Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. And this guy just totally photobombed this picture here, didn't he? He definitely knows that he's standing behind some famous characters, infamous characters. Now, we see that the Rosenbergs, we'll look here in a minute, what happens to them, you probably know. But going on 1950s is known as, and this goes back to the American age, this is America's decade. If you look back at the 50s, you think of all those, suburbia, you think of, rock and roll with Elvis maybe. You think of, just the yellow house with the white picket fence. It's just, it's idealized in American society, American history. And we see that rock and roll is actually, some extremists claim it's a communist, sabotage. It's a communist conspiracy to undermine America. It's leading to corruption of America. And the reason being is you see teenagers being arrested more in the 50s than ever before in American history. And what they don't put together is the reason why they're probably being arrested more is they're able to travel further away from home. And because these automobiles are more accessible by the 1950s than they were a few decades earlier. So we're going to see American teenagers going to be traveling further, and this teen delinquency will be blamed on rock and roll, which I thought was interesting. Rock and roll was coined by, and this is probably why the Cleveland Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland, or the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland, by a Cleveland disc jockey in 1951 named Alan Freed. And rock and roll was actually a term used in African American communities dealing with dancing and sex. Now, we also have the suburban frontier. This is looking at 13 million homes are built between 1948 and 1958, and 11 million of these homes are in suburbia. And we see a reason for this growth in suburbia is going to be because of the fact that the GI Bill of Rights. And you guys see it over here. If your American soldiers are going to be able to, come back from the war and get economic benefits, including, unemployment pay, scholarships for education. They get low mortgage loans in the sense of interest rates, and they get pensions and they get job training. So they get all this stuff, rightfully so, going off to fight the Germans and the Japanese in Italy during World War II. So they get this GI Bill, which is going to give them money in their pockets. It's going to fuel the economic growth that'll lead to this growth of suburbia. And you see these Levitt towns, these homes that are all built the same. A few models maybe. You have these Levitt towns where there's planned community schools and parks, swimming pools, playing fields, shopping centers. So you see these things are there. And you see people moving also by the 1950s to the south. And the reason being is you see air conditioning is much more affordable. It's cleaner. You have these air conditioning units that are inexpensive. You can just put them in the windows, and it allowed people to move south for the first time and actually live down there. Nobody likes living in the south when it's that hot. So we see this all going down. As a result of this war. And this is, again, we can also see 1950s, America has no competition in regards to, hold on, I gotta let the dog out. America has no competition from, Europe was the most powerful continent in the world. They destroyed themselves in World War I, World War II. America has really no competitors at this time. So if you're really picking an American decade, I would say the 50s is the decade to, being in America. And you see also suburbia. You have this, we'll look at the highway system that's developed. It's going to allow people to live further away from work. There's a picture of suburbs, and there's a nutshell. And looking at the 1950s, you're also looking at this growth of the Federal Highway Act, which will be under Eisenhower, which I picture here's Eisenhower. This 1956, it creates a network of interstate highways, which allows for the needs for commerce, trade, buying and selling, get Americans traveling, vacation, all that fun stuff. And also, it helps with the defense. I kind of steal this probably from Hitler and the Germans with the Autobahn back in 1930s Germany. But this is really going to stimulate economic growth in America, and we can see this consumer culture really take off. We have this rising standard of living in America. You have credit cards, and the first plastic ones in 1949. You have TVs soaring in America. They jumped from, I think it was around 5,000 to, I don't know, like 40 million televisions. You got TV dinners, and you have these shows with white America on them in 1950s as well. So we see this is looking at 1950s America, and really this is huge, this interstate system that we still use today. And again, it allows these cars to travel, and we see $32 billion, and it costs, and it's largely funded by gasoline taxes. There's 45 plus thousand bridges. I'm sorry, 55,000 bridges, and there's 47,000 miles it stretches. And just think about all the things this promotes. It promotes vacations, as I mentioned, hotels, restaurants, shopping. You got billboards. You have fast food. You got tourism. You got jobs. It's going to stimulate economic growth. This is huge for America in the 1950s, and it's really going to reinforce the fact that Americans like to travel, and we like the freedom and the independence of traveling, and all those different things. So this is looking at 1950s America, and yeah. So we have Eisenhower. Eisenhower, as we know, he was the dude behind D-Day. When I say the dude, I'm putting that in quotations. He's one that plans this. It is a heck of a feat that the Germans never know where we were landing, which compliments to Eisenhower for coming up with that plan. And he's going to be somebody who is viewed as kind of the dad of the 1950s, and people respect this guy and for all he did during World War II, the way he carries himself. He's not really he thinks less government is more. He's somebody who golfs more than he actually is in the White House, I think. He's somebody who's, but shows a lot of poise and restraint. Not a single American soldier died while he was in office, but he does get us involved in some shady dealings. He overthrows governments throughout the world. He'll help actually lead to the bad taste between us and Iran today with 1953 when he uses the CIA. And he actually listens to Dulles, who's the head of the CIA, to overthrow a democratically elected leader, Mossadegh, I believe his name was, and replaced with the Shah. And then the Shah will be overthrown in 1979. We get to Carter. But this guy here, he's somebody who's, for better and worse, he's somebody who's doesn't want big government. He doesn't believe that his local and state should be able to handle things, which is going to be why he's not somebody who does well for the civil rights movement, only when he's forced to, which we talked about him a little bit with that, if you remember. But he's somebody who's, going to lead us and with his poised demeanor through the 1950s, which again is a good decade for America. And he takes a hard line with his foreign policy. He kind of bluffs a lot and kind of flexes American muscle on different things. And thankfully, we never got into war. And he's the first professional soldier who was elected in the White House since Grant, which is about 100 years before him, after the Civil War. So there we go. And we see that he's going to be, many people are going to pressure him to kind of lessen the sentence for the Rosenbergs, because both will be sentenced to die by the electric chair. And we see they will be electrocuted in 1953, 54, I think it was. They'll be electrocuted in electric chair, 53 it was. And we see the reason why they're electrocuted, we have to think about, if we think about the atomic bomb, it being developed, if there's no atomic bomb, there's no way Stalin gives a green light for the Korean conflict. And if there's no Korean conflict, there's not 33,000 Americans dead. So that's why they'll be electrocuted in electric chair. As I mentioned, 1953, he backs the CIA to overthrow Mossadegh, leader of the country of Iran at the time, and he replaced him with the Shah. Here's a picture of the Shah. This guy was a corrupt putz who's going to be abuse his power. He'll abuse a lot of Iranians with his power. They hate him over there. He flaunts all of his wealth. He blows a lot of his wealth, and he's somebody who's going to be hated by the Iranians. And we help put him in power, so we're going to be hated for putting him in power and for something else we do later on. In his presidency, he's also known for being the president during Sputnik, which is going to create the Sputnik craze. People are going to freak out with Sputnik, that if the Soviets can send a satellite to space and this thing orbits Earth, that they can actually send a satellite to attack us from space and spy on us and attack us with nuclear bombs from space. So this shows that the Soviets are ahead of us in science and math. We'll see Americans freak out. We will see Americans really push for really restructuring our education system, especially in math and science. And this creates that Sputnik mania kind of deal. And, somebody even states that they could attack New York like throwing rocks off a bridge. Now, Eisenhower's really last kind of big thing that we can mention on his way out here is a sense of he's going to, his farewell address, he warns Americans, be careful of something. And it was the military-industrial complex. This is what he's known for, is giving this speech. And he's warning the dangers of the size and the strength of the military, in the sense of, if we keep pumping all this money in defense, our tax funding, and putting in these large corporations, they're going to be able to corrupt our politicians, that they're going to be able to lobby our politicians to do whatever they want them to do. This is that military-industrial complex. Be careful making our military too strong, in the sense of giving it too much money. And this is what he's stating, and this is something that we are still struggling with today with defense spending. When you see defense spending, it's talking about military spending. It's military, which is a big portion of American spending in the government. Now, I'm going to stop it there. So make this, and I'll finish up with part 3.